Before this story pulls you under, do one thing: subscribe, like, and comment now, because once you step inside this case, you won't look at trust the same way again. Some monsters don't hide in the dark. Some stand in the spotlight. On the surface, everything about him felt safe. He was the kind of man parents thanked. The kind they shook hands with after games. He wore team jackets, spoke with confidence, and carried himself like someone who had nothing to hide. He coached kids who didn't have much, kids from broken homes, kids who needed structure, discipline, and someone who believed in them. He told them they mattered. And the community believed him. They trusted him with their children. For years, his name was spoken with admiration. A respected football coach. A charity founder. A mentor. Someone who opened doors for kids no one else noticed. His organization promised opportunity, safety, and guidance. Parents felt relief knowing their children were under his watch. Schools welcomed him. Institutions protected him. His reputation became armor. And that armor made him untouchable. Behind the applause and praise, something else existed. Something quiet. Something carefully hidden. But no one wanted to see it. No one wanted to believe it. Because believing it meant accepting that the danger wasn't outside, it was already inside the system meant to protect children. The first crack didn't come from an investigation. It didn't come from police surveillance or a whistleblower looking for fame. It came from a single, shaken voice on a phone line. A call made with hesitation. A call weighed down by fear, confusion, and guilt. The person on the other end wasn't sure what they were reporting. Only that something felt wrong. Very wrong. At first, the report didn't sound like much. No dramatic accusation. No clear timeline. Just fragments. A disturbing moment. A child's behavior that suddenly didn't make sense. A situation that crossed a line no one could explain away. The kind of call that could have easily been dismissed. But it wasn't. The authorities listened. And once they did, they couldn't unhear it. As investigators quietly began to dig, they quickly ran into a wall: his reputation. Every question raised another barrier. Every concern was met with disbelief. Not him, people said. He's done so much good. The idea that someone so respected could be hiding something so dark felt impossible. That disbelief bought him time. The deeper investigators went, the stranger things became. Records didn't match memories. Stories conflicted. Adults who should have acted sooner hesitated. Some claimed they misunderstood what they saw. Others said they were told to handle it internally. There were moments when intervention could have happened, moments that now felt unbearably loud in hindsight. And still, no one stopped him. The children remained silent, not because they had nothing to say, but because they believed no one would listen. When the person hurting you is praised by everyone else, silence feels safer than truth. Especially when you're young. Especially when the system stands behind him. Then investigators uncovered something they couldn't ignore. Not proof yet, but a pattern. Similar accounts. Separate incidents. Different years. Different places. The same name. The same authority. The same access. What once looked like coincidence now looked deliberate. And what once felt like a misunderstanding began to feel calculated. Every new detail raised the stakes. If this was real, if even a fraction of it was true, then the damage wasn't limited to one child or one moment. It meant years. It meant dozens. It meant an entire network of trust had been exploited. And it meant the clock was ticking. Because the man everyone trusted was still around children. Investigators moved carefully, knowing one wrong step could shut everything down. Evidence could disappear. Stories could change. And the weight of who he was made the truth dangerous to pursue. Powerful people don't fall quietly. Institutions don't admit failure easily. Then came the discovery that changed the direction of the case entirely. Something documented. Something undeniable. Something that proved the call hadn't been an overreaction, it had been a warning. And when investigators realized how long this had been allowed to continue, one chilling question echoed through the room. How many people knew, and said nothing? Once the first pattern emerged, the investigation changed overnight. This was no longer about a single report or a misunderstood incident. Investigators began treating the case like a ticking bomb, careful with every step, but painfully aware that every delay could mean another child at risk. They started quietly. No announcements. No headlines. Just files pulled from storage and names cross-checked against timelines that stretched back years. What they found was unsettling. Complaints that went nowhere. Notes written and buried. Conversations that ended with shrugs and reassurances instead of action. Each piece alone seemed small. Together, they painted a picture of systematic silence. The most disturbing part wasn't just what happened, it was who knew. Teachers. Administrators. Colleagues. Adults who had authority, credibility, and power. Some claimed they misunderstood what they saw. Others said they reported concerns to higher-ups and were told it was handled. A few admitted they were afraid of damaging a powerful man's reputation. Fear, loyalty, and convenience had blended into something toxic. And at the center of it all was him, calm, confident, untouchable. When investigators finally began speaking to the victims, the emotional weight of the case became impossible to ignore. These were no longer vague accusations. These were real people, now older, struggling to put words to memories they had buried for years. Many had convinced themselves it was their fault. Others believed no one would ever believe them. Some broke down during interviews. Others spoke in flat, detached voices, as if recounting someone else's life. The details differed, but the patterns were hauntingly similar: private moments disguised as mentorship, trust twisted into control, silence enforced through fear and manipulation. What made it worse was how long it had lasted. This wasn't a predator acting recklessly. This was someone who understood systems. Someone who knew exactly how far he could go without consequences. He positioned himself where oversight was weak and trust was high. He surrounded himself with institutions that benefited from his success, and were therefore reluctant to question it. As the investigation widened, tension spread through the community. Rumors began circulating. Parents whispered at games. Former participants started asking themselves uncomfortable questions about moments they'd dismissed years earlier. The same name that once brought pride now brought unease. Then the pressure reached him. He sensed it before anyone said a word. The calls that went unanswered. The meetings that felt different. The subtle shift in how people looked at him. For the first time in decades, the armor of reputation began to crack. And with that crack came risk. Investigators feared he might disappear, or worse, that evidence could vanish. They moved faster, pushing for cooperation, pressing institutions for records they had resisted releasing for years. Each delay felt like another betrayal. And then, something alarming happened. A key figure, someone who had knowledge of early incidents, suddenly changed their story. Details they had previously shared were now unclear. Dates shifted. Statements softened. It felt rehearsed. Almost as if someone had reminded them what was at stake. That's when investigators realized they weren't just uncovering abuse. They were uncovering protection. The case was no longer about one man. It was about a system that failed repeatedly, and then covered its own tracks. The deeper they went, the more resistance they faced. Legal barriers. Institutional silence. Public disbelief. Every step forward came with consequences. But the evidence kept growing. Documents that should never have existed. Internal emails that showed concern, but no action. Testimonies that contradicted official statements. Slowly, the truth became impossible to contain. The moment investigators knew the case would explode came when they secured a statement that directly contradicted years of public denial. A single account that connected early warnings to later inaction. Proof that this could have been stopped. The silence hadn't just protected him. It had empowered him. And as investigators prepared to make the case public, they understood one final, terrifying reality: once the truth came out, it wouldn't just destroy one man's legacy, it would expose everyone who helped him hide. Because when the full story surfaced, the question wouldn't be how he got away with it for so long. It would be why no one stopped him. When the case finally went public, it didn't arrive gently. It detonated. Headlines exploded across the country. The trusted coach. The beloved mentor. The man parents had defended without hesitation. Suddenly, his name was no longer associated with opportunity and guidance, but with allegations so severe they made people physically recoil. The community didn't just feel betrayed, it felt complicit. As formal charges were prepared, more victims came forward. They arrived hesitantly at first, unsure if it was finally safe to speak. Many had spent years convincing themselves what happened wasn't real, or wasn't serious enough to matter. Others had tried to forget, only to be pulled back by the sudden flood of news. With each new statement, the scope of the damage became clearer, and far larger than anyone imagined. This wasn't a single failure. It was a chain of them. In court, the image he had carefully crafted for decades began to collapse. The confidence that once protected him now worked against him. Prosecutors laid out timelines that spanned years. Testimonies revealed repeated patterns of manipulation and access. His status wasn't incidental, it was the very thing that allowed him to operate without challenge. And then came the moment no one could ignore. One victim described reporting concerns long before the scandal broke. Another explained how adults noticed something was wrong, but chose not to escalate it. The courtroom fell silent as it became clear that warnings had existed. Opportunities to intervene had been missed. The truth wasn't just about what he did, but about who looked away. The defense tried to lean on his past. His achievements. His charitable work. His reputation. But the jury saw through it. Good deeds didn't erase harm. Authority didn't excuse abuse. And silence didn't equal innocence. When the verdict was read, there was no dramatic outburst. No explosion of emotion. Just a heavy, irreversible finality. He was found guilty. Sentenced to spend the rest of his life behind bars. For some, it felt like justice. For others, it felt painfully incomplete. Because prison couldn't give back stolen childhoods. It couldn't undo years of fear, shame, and confusion. It couldn't erase the knowledge that so many adults had failed to protect the most vulnerable. In the aftermath, institutions scrambled to distance themselves. Statements were issued. Policies were rewritten. Committees were formed. But the damage was already done. Trust, once broken at that scale, doesn't return easily. Parents across the country began asking uncomfortable questions. About who they trusted. About who had access to their children. About how easily authority could silence doubt. The case became a warning, taught in ethics courses, discussed in newsrooms, whispered about in schools and locker rooms. And yet, one haunting truth lingered. He didn't succeed because he was invisible. He succeeded because he was believed. Because people assumed monsters looked a certain way. Because questioning a respected figure felt more dangerous than ignoring a child's discomfort. Because reputation was valued over protection. Long after the courtroom emptied, victims continued rebuilding their lives in private. Some found peace in being heard. Others carried scars no sentence could heal. But together, they had done something powerful. They broke the silence. And that silence, once shattered, revealed something far more unsettling than a single criminal. It revealed how easily systems can fail when trust goes unquestioned. So if this story unsettled you, it should have. Because the most frightening criminals aren't always hiding in shadows. Sometimes, they're standing in plain sight, smiling, praised, and trusted with the very people they intend to harm. And if you think this case was hard to believe, the next one will make you question everything. Subscribe now, because once you start seeing the patterns, you can't unsee them.